The first theory we want to talk about is called rational choice theory. It's one of the oldest explanations for understanding how and why people engage in deviant or abnormal behavior. And it's very, very appropriate for understanding how people view deviance within the world of sport, recreation, and physical activity. The basic assumption of rational choice and reasoning theory is that people act according to the exercise of free will and reasoning. They do something because they want to achieve a particular goal. Rational in the sense that they think about it, they do a cost-benefit analysis, and a cost-benefit analysis is where people weigh more or less the benefits and the potential hazards of an action before they actually engage in it. A couple of concepts that are very important to this line of thinking is free will and rational choice. Free will. Basically, it's talking about the individual's responsibility for behavior. I choose to engage in a particular activity, therefore I reap the benefits, but then also any of the consequences as well. Okay? Society, culture, and communities hold individuals accountable for deviant or violent behavior based off of this idea because the assumption is that there was a conscious calculation to engage or not engage in a particular form of deviance. Now, rational choice. It's a method of reaching a decision in regards to one's own behavior. And it's basically saying that the choice is based upon the weighing of potential consequences. And this is good in terms of the rewards or the negative consequences or the sanctions. This is one of the oldest forms of understanding deviant or abnormal behavior. However, just because it's one of the oldest doesn't mean that it's without flaws or limitations. A couple of the major limitations to understanding deviant behavior, especially within sports, from a rational choice or reasoning point of view, and there are three major ones. One, social factors. All right, the socioeconomic status, whether you're in a position of power, how much money, how much wealth that your family has, and those types of resources, that's going to influence people finding out about you engaging in forms of deviant behavior. Also, it talks about defining the worth. You know, what is an inappropriate or appropriate action? So if you're talking about something like an alleged rape by a professional football player in perhaps something like the NFL. For a long time, if you think about Ray Rice and that particular abhorrent incident in 2014, 2015, and the NFL's response to Ray Rice and the releasing of video of him in a casino, physically assaulting, punching, and more or less knocking out his fiancée at the time, and this was on the cameras in the elevator. Originally, he received a very, very short, something like 2-game suspension. Public outcry was so loud that it went up to an indefinite suspension, and then it was a year-long suspension. And so how do you define, in that particular case, the NFL had a very particular view of what happened. And they said, we see that video evidence, and as a result, we're going to give X, Y, and Z number of games as a suspension, as a sanction for this type of behavior. Another NFL example goes back many years to the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Ben Roethlisberger. And there was allegations of rape. And at the time, so what the NFL did was he was suspended 6 games. And then he was able to appeal that suspension. And then it was reduced to 4 games off of, quote unquote, what they called good behavior. Or it was 3 or 4 weeks' time they believed that he had shown some contrition and things like that. Now, we're not talking necessarily about that particular event as much as what rational choice and reasoning really does fall short of explaining are some of those power dynamics which define the sanctions or the suspensions in sport for deviant behavior. When you think about the complex social status of athletes or coaches or individuals that work within sport organizations that are very high profile, that status is going to influence how people view certain acts of deviant behavior. Now, let's get away from kind of alleged criminal activity, and let's just think about high-profile college basketball coaches. And you can go back and you can search on the internet, and there's a large number of montages of videos that show just this absolutely almost crazy-like behavior of coaches just screaming at players, screaming at officials. Now, if you think about it, if you were a leader in a non-sport organization, you were a business, and something happened, and you're going to be held to a standard and held accountable for your emotions. You can't just go crazy and start yelling at people, grabbing people, cursing at people, those types of things. But a lot of people say, well, in the realm of coaching, if you're dealing with something like this particular example as players, people say, well, it's an emotional game. Well, I imagine it's a very emotional time where you're doing corporate mergers or other things if you're working in intense, high-profile positions within the U.S. or global and international governmental positions. So, there's something very unique and very different about sports, especially here in American culture, and how we define and sanction deviant behavior. And sometimes, in some instances, a lot of it has to do with the high-profile nature of sports. And this is not necessarily even just with college or professional sports. I grew up in the state of Texas, and when you talk about kind of just globally speaking, the importance of high school football in the state of Texas, you might have some of these other complex status factors associated with any type of deviant behavior in that particular example. Another one is this because it's called hubris, which is a pride-driven arrogance, a sense of entitlement, feeling invulnerable, things like that. And so, hubris is kind of interesting because let's just talk about athletes. And we're not saying that all professional athletes are, or even intercollegiate athletes are entitled or have some of these high-profile incidents that they're involved with. But it does serve as a nice little case study or petri dish, if you will, if you're kind of looking at and trying to understand some of these issues. And so if you are, an athlete, a youth sport athlete, and we have websites and we have scouting services, and we have in the world of either youth soccer or something like AAU basketball, you go to different camps as early as 4th and 5th grade, and people can grade the talent, quote unquote, of the young kids out there playing basketball. And so if you are known primarily as, say, a basketball player, or if you're thinking about club volleyball, for example, if you're known as an athlete from ages 9, 10, and 11 all the way up to 18, 19, 20, 21, that means most of your life is being known as an athlete and maybe even treated differently by people in the community. And so as a result, the result of all of that is this sense of hubris, this sense that you might have people that feel invulnerable. It is a sense of arrogance and entitlement that's born out of the fact that they have this very, very unique status. And so this last point here of others is just me asking you all to think internally about some other things that might kind of limit or impact this theory of rational choice and reasoning. Rational choice and reasoning as a theory or just kind of as a process, these things are important ways to understand how people interact with and explain deviance in the world of American sports. Like I said before, if you look at the NFL and Commissioner Goodell's Employees Code of Conduct, that's the code of conduct that's going to be applicable to athletes. It's technically applicable to coaches and administrators in these organizations and such. Or if you look at compliance efforts in the NCAA, regardless of whether we're talking about FBS, FCS, Division I, Division II, Division III levels, whatever, But then also many league substance abuse or performance-enhancing drug use punishments. If you're talking about WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency on the global scale, a lot of these punishments and how people understand, view, and sanction deviant behavior is based out of this camp, if you will, of rational choice and reasoning. It's also rational choice is very, very commonly used by media. If we're talking about ESPN reports or CNN reports, Bleacher Report, if you're talking about people breaking news on social media, those types of things, and kind of globally speaking, the general public tends to view athletes, coaches, sport administrators, people that are a part of this institution of sport, recreation, and physical activity, they tend to judge them socially through the use or through the lens of rational choice and reasoning. One of the things that we do know, though, is that not all forms of deviance within the world of sport can be explained by rational choice. And again, rational choice is saying, okay, I'm choosing to engage in a gesture, to say something, or to do something, and I've thought about the consequences, and I've decided that I'm okay with the consequences. And that's fine, except, like I said, it doesn't explain all forms of deviance or violence within the world of sport, and here's kind of a famous example. Here's a little Dutch boy, which was a soccer fan, a football fan, that this picture made the rounds on the internet many years ago. And look at this young man, okay? And obviously you see the hand gesture that he's making towards the opposing team. Look at the rage in those eyes and that little face, okay? Now, if you look at the age of this young man, was he going through the rational choice and reasoning process saying, okay, I'm supporting this particular team here, our opponent I do not like, so I'm going to engage in a gesture that then is derogatory to them? Most likely not. Most likely he was role modeling what he saw other fans, people that maybe in his family or his friends or things like that, that were very important to him, and so he's sort of mimicking what he sees. Or perhaps he was just really, really angry. Either way, rational choice, reasoning as a theory does not sort of on the surface necessarily explain this particular incidence of sport deviant behavior. So as a result, what we need to do is keep refining and adding explanations to our particular toolbox.